Greetings! My lecture today is Anthony F. Elmore, Father of Black Buddhist History. In this lecture, we show that our black ancestors of Egypt, Ethiopia, Nubia, and Abyssinia practiced Buddhism. Buddhism was in Africa 1,000 years before Buddhism ever got to Japan. We are Nichiren Buddhists who follow the teachings of Shakyamuni Buddha, who taught that the Lotus Sutra was the highest of his teachings. Let me share a black view of Nichiren Buddhism. Nichiren writing is called the Go-Sho. In the Go-Sho, the three Tipitaka masters pray for rain. Nichiren writes, quote, "These non-Buddhist teachings came about through a mistaken reading of various sutras of the Buddhas who preceded Shakyamuni Buddha," unquote. Nichiren teaches the fact that there were Buddhas and sutras in the world before Shakyamuni Buddha. British historian Sir Godfrey Higgins writes in his 1833 book, The Anaclipsis, quote, "The elder Buddha is Hermes Trismegistus," and he says in the book, The Anaclipsis, on page 5, it says, what? Quote, "The learned Maoris entertain no doubts that the elder Buddha of India is no other than the elder Hermes Trismegistus of Egypt, and that the original character is of the antediluvian race." Let me share with you an absolute and scientific assessment of Buddhism or Buddhist teachings that I've learned from many of my Japanese teachers. Specifically, when you learn Buddhism from the STI, Nichiren Shoshu, and Nichiren Shu, you are going to get a shallow or a racist or myopic view of Buddhism. Let me cite why the Japanese view or views of Buddhism is myopic. Japan is a nation of Mahayana Buddhists. Mahayana Buddhism is a time in history when Buddhism was separated by race, culture, and language. And the way that the Japanese teach Buddhism, most Japanese teach Buddhism in a way or with a practice that extricate all black history from Buddhism. This is why you will never hear anything about Buddhism in Africa, because the Sanskrit teachings extricated all of the black history from Buddhism. Let me put this in a clear and common sense terms about Japanese Buddhist teachers whom I learned Buddhism from originally. The SGI, Nichiren Shoshu, Nichiren Shu, make a clear and concerted effort to remove black history from Buddhism. Now, let's go into history and give you a different view. The father of history is Herodotus. He was born in 484 BC and died 425 BC. This puts Shakyamuni Buddha about 150 years before the birth of the father of history. Now, Herodotus writes, quote, "There were two Ethiopias, one east of the Red Sea and one west of the Red Sea. The Greek historian Homer lived around 800 BC, or 150 years before the Buddha Shakyamuni was born. Homer wrote that India was called Eastern Ethiopia. Ethiopia is a Greek word that means burnt or dark skin. Science proves that the ancient India civilization was the Harappan culture or the Indus Valley civilization. Science and archaeology proves that there was never any white or Caucasian people who ever lived in the Harappan culture. The reason we bring this point is because Japanese sects like the SGI, Nichiren Shoshu, and Nichiren Shu teach in their teachings about the Asian invasion theory, the Aryan invasion theory. If there was such a thing as an Aryan invasion in ancient times, India would not have been known as Eastern Ethiopia. Ancient India was Eastern Ethiopia because India and Egypt were the land of black people. Herodotus writes about India, and he says, quote, "All the tribes I mentioned, their skins are all the same color, much like the Ethiopians." Now, this is in the history of Herodotus. Now, Dorius, the Greek historian in 100 BC, writes, "And up upon his return to Greece, they gathered around and asked, 'Tell us about the great land of the blacks called Ethiopia.' And Herodotus said, 'There are two great nations, one in Sid, which is India, and the other Egypt.' Blacks not only lived in Ethiopia, blacks lived in India, in both India and Egypt, and blacks were Buddhists. Many Japanese and whites practice racist, revisionist history. Egypt is in Africa, and the name India means black. In Africa, some of the blacks are known as Nubians. And in India, the same blacks are known as Naga. British historian Godfrey Higgins writes, quote, "The time has now arrived when it becomes proper to enter upon an examination of the doctrines of the celebrated Buddha of India, which were the foundations of all the mythoses of the Western nations." While Godfrey Higgins note that Buddhism is the foundation of all of the mythoses of Western nations, Japanese, or some Japanese and whites, practice a Buddhist teaching that extricate black Buddhist history from their Buddhist teachings. The history of Buddha is the history of Egypt and all Western civilizations. We hold that understanding Buddhism in Africa is important. Ask the question of your Asian Buddhist teachers why we never hear about blacks, Africans, Ethiopians, Nubians, or Nagas in Buddhism. We ask why the Sanskrit Buddhist teachings remove all black history from Buddhism. The Buddhist religion is the religion of ancient blacks. In order to justify slavery in America, racist whites had to rewrite black people out of history and civilization. Some of us educated black people in America have a knowledge about what happened to black people in Egypt. What is rare to find in America or anywhere in the world is to find anyone who can connect the dots between Africa and India. What is important is the black people practicing Buddhism in the Nichiren sects of the SGI, Nichiren Shoshu, and Nichiren Shu. It is Nichiren Buddhism that connects us together. The Nichiren Buddhism taught by the SGI, Nichiren Shoshu, and Nichiren Shu is a racist Buddhism. However, the teachings of Nichiren Buddhism is the correct Buddhism for the latter day of the law. In America, where whites, blacks, and Japanese and others can come together and bring world peace. This can only happen when there is a true Buddhism, absence of the racist Buddhist history. Now, one of the things I want to point out, I want you to see a picture of an Egyptian with the snake. The snake is called the Naga, and the Buddhists were Naga, and the Naga was in both Egypt and India. Notice that is the cobra. The cobra is not indigenous of Egypt. But in this lecture, we showed that there was a close relationship between Egypt and India because they were one and the same Cushite or black people. Now, the father of history, Herodotus, wrote that there were two Ethiopias, India and Egypt. In common sense terms, these were black lands and black history. Let us read what Godfrey Higgins read again. He says, Colonel Franklin says, the learned Maurice entertains no doubt that the elder Buddha of India is none other than the elder Hermes Trismegistus of Egypt, and that the original character of the antediluvian race. In other words, in India and in Egypt, they both worship the elder Buddha, Hermes Trismegistus. Now, the young Buddha was Shakyamuni Buddha. Now, let us be clear that both the Indians and Egyptians both had the same Buddhist god of Hermes Trismegistus. Buddhism was practiced in India and Egypt long before there was a Shakyamuni Buddha. Again, let us look at what Nichiren Shonin writes about the matter. In the Gold Show called The Three Pitaka Masters Pray for Rain, Nichiren writes, these non-Buddhist teachings came about through a mistaken reading of various sutras of Buddhas who preceded Shakyamuni Buddha. In India, the Brahmanism or the non-Buddhist teachings came about because of mistaken reading of various sutras of Buddhas who preceded Shakyamuni Buddha. Now, let's get back to Shakyamuni Buddha. Egyptian archaeologist Philandus Petrie was an English Egyptologist and a pioneer of systematic methodology in archaeology and preservation of artifacts. He connected and found evidence in Egypt that connected Shakyamuni's Buddhism in Egypt to the Persian period. Now, let us get deep in explaining to you about Buddhism in Africa. Let us give you some absolute history about Buddhism in Africa. In the book, The Anaclipsis, Godfrey Higgins writes, he says, quote, I suppose the shepherd kings who conquered Egypt were the Rajputs, or Buddhists of the country of Raja Bedouins from Rajasthan. The Israelites, as well as the royal separates, were both, in fact, Arab tribes also from Arabia on the Indus. From Raja and Put, or Buddha, came the name of the country of Rajputs, or royal Buddhists, a part for the name Buddha. Now, please hear me very clear. No Daisaki high priest, or any black scholar has laid out Buddhist history like the way we're doing. Let me give you some absolute teachings of Buddhism. Egypt and India were both connected. There were Buddhists who came from India who conquered the Egyptians. Let us be clear. Buddhists came from India and they conquered the Egyptians. These Buddhists were called royal shepherds or shepherd kings. They also known as the Hyksos. Now, they're also known as Israelis, but they were Buddhists. Many blacks say that the original Jews were black and do not know about the original Buddhists. But the original Jews, or the tribe of Judah, were Buddhists from India. Now, what I want you to do is do a Google search on shepherd kings. They were Buddhists. The shepherd kings were called Hyksos. The Hyksos were black or Cushite people. The Hyksos came from India or the Indus area. Many white and Jews get upset because Afrocentrists tell correct black history. Now you got an African American, Anthony M. Elmore, who is bringing in the factor that most people don't know about, and that is the Buddhist factor. Now, I wrote this about many blacks who practice Buddhism with the SGI. You got blind stooges, or those who are willfully ignorant. In many ways, it's easier to be dumb and follow a Daisaki Keita going around singing some song like Sensei or Teacher, when you got a teacher that don't even teach anything from the standpoint of history as it relates to blacks. Let me add another bit of history to the story. The Buddhist shepherd kings came from India. One of the tribes is called the tribe of Judah. They were Buddhists. The shepherd kings from India went on to establish a land in Africa called Abyssinia. The land that they called Ethiopia were Abyssinians, and the Abyssinians came from India, and they were the shepherd kings. The shepherd kings is actually a part of my life. My wife, Bogalas, is from Abyssinia, or what they call today Ethiopia. The Ethiopians and the Dalits of Naga people in India are the same people. They call themselves the tribe of Judah. They are Naga people from India. They are the shepherd kings, or the Hyksos, who actually invaded Egypt. Now, let's get to some history. Now, Dr. Clyde Winters, an Afrocentric historian, writes this about the Naga people. He says, the Naga people, the ancient records is called the Hebrew Nagas. Nagas. Now, the ancient Ethiopians were Naga people. That's why they got a writing called the Hebrew Nagas. Nagas is from Naga, the Ari kings who ruled India. The founders of the dynasty were Zar, Besi, and Gabo. This dynasty, according to the Hebrew Nagas, began around 370 BC. The rulers of India and Ethiopia were called Naga. The Hebrew Nagas claims that Queen Makeda, that's the Queen of Sheba, had servants and merchants. They traded for her on land and in the Indies in Awan. It also says that her son, Abna Hakim, or Menelik I, made a campaign in the Indian Sea. The king of India made gifts and donations and prostrated himself before him. It is also said that Menelik ruled an empire that extended from the rivers of Egypt, that is, the Blue Nile, to the west, and from the south shore to eastern India. According to the Kira Nagas, the Kira Nagas identification of an East Indian empire ruled by the Naga corresponds to the Naga colonies in Deccan and on the east. In common sense terms, the Queen of Sheba, we know from Bible, ruled parts in Africa and India. This is called, in history, this is called the Aksum Empire. If you look at the Ethiopians, they look like Indians because they were the original shepherd kings. Please make note that the language the so-called Aryans called Sanskrit came from the Ethiopian language of Ge'ez. Ge'ez is 4,000 years old, and this is the language of the Ethiopians because it is a black language, and the language of Sanskrit came from Ge'ez. Those of you who practice Buddhism with the Japanese sects, the Japanese practice a Buddhism that extricate black history and culture. Let me teach you about Buddhism in Africa. The way to learn about Buddhism in Africa, you must know the name of what the Buddhists were called. They were called Gymnosophists. It is outright shameful that black people who are being taught Buddhism by Asians do not know about the Gymnosophists. Gym means naked and sophist means philosopher. When you Google the word, you would learn that they are naked priests from India who lived in Ethiopia. The whole of the space between the Nile and Abyssinia and northward to Lower Egypt once constituted Ethiopia. It was called Sudan, land of blacks. Once Egypt extended to Lower Nubia. The ancient kingdom of Meroe was Upper Nubia and was divided into agricultural and grazing lands. Herodotus, this is the father of history, speaks of Meroe as the cradle of Gymnosophist Buddhists. Philostraphus, in the life of Apollonius and Jerome, writes that the Gymnosophists of Cush, who settled near the Nile, he further states, having been forced to migrate after the murder of their king. Let us connect the dots of Buddhism having a Buddhist having to flee Meroe. Now, in other lectures, I told you in 184 BC, the Black Murian ruler by the name of Brihadatta was killed in broad daylight by the Brahmin general Pushmitra, who was a Brahmin. When the Brahmins took over in India, they put 100 pieces of gold on the head of any Buddhist priest. The Buddhists had to flee India. Now, once Pushmitra got into power in India, he put a bounty out of 100 pieces of gold, and he began to kill all of the Buddhists. In fact, the Buddhists had to go and leave India because they were killing off all of the Buddhists. This is when Buddhism changed in India in 184 BC. Now, where the Buddhists in India went, they went to home. They left India, and many of them moved to the great land of Nubia in Meroe, right in Egypt on the Nile River, right there near Memphis, the capital of Egypt, Meroe, and the land of Nubia. The land of Nubia where Herodotus had said the culture of the great Mecca of Buddhism. They were not called Buddhists, they were called Gymnosophists, and they were living in Meroe. When those Buddhists left India, they went and found a home with their other brothers. They were called Naga in India, and they were called Nubians in Nubia. And the ancient religion of the blacks in Nubia was Buddhism. Now, what I want to show you, I want you to look at the temple. It's called the Lion Temple at Naga Sudan in Nubia. We see conclusive archaeological evidence of Shakyamuni's Buddhism, because what we see at this temple, we see the lotus flower coming, you see the Naga snake coming up out of the lotus flower. And when you see this coming out of the lotus flower, that is in a Sokan edict, because from 2069 BC to 232, when King Asoka was living, he sent edicts and he made communication. And we see the Asoka edict at the Lion's Temple in Nubia and at Naga Sudan. So we have given you literary, archaeological, historical evidence of Buddhism in Africa. Now, let's bring this lecture to a conclusion. We believe we have presented the most comprehensive evidence, but let's bring this lecture to a close. Now, remember, in 29 BC, they had the Fourth Buddhist Council in Ceylon, which is now called Sri Lanka, where the Buddhists got together, and at the Fourth Buddhist Council, they put together the largest religious work in the history of any kind of religion. 11 times larger than the Bible. They created a work called the Pali Canon. The Pali Canon was written in the Pali language, Apostolic or Pali language. This was not Sanskrit. Sanskrit wasn't even invented yet. This happened in 29 BC in Ceylon. And the most concrete evidence of Buddhism in Africa is in the Pali Canon, because in the Vinaya Pitaka, they wrote about the Blamias. The Blamias were the Nubians who made such an impact that it was put in the Pali Canon. So we have conclusive evidence in Buddhist writings that Buddhism was in Africa because it's in the Pali Canon and the Vinaya Pitaka. There's nothing wrong with Black Buddhists. They were Buddhists. They were black. It's nothing wrong with that. It was not until AD that they started the caste system, because a group of people who had mean spirits started a Buddhism called Mahayana. It was based on skin color. They started this low-down caste system. They rechanged history. They rewrote history, and they started a new Buddhism. In the 13th century in Japan, a man who identified himself as a Chandela, Nichiren Shonin, went and found out what was going on in Japan. And he says, what has happened is this is the wrong Buddhism. And he challenged all of the Mahayana Buddhism in Japan. And he says, only the Lotus Sutra is the true Mahayana or correct Buddhism. All the other Buddhisms was considered Hinayana Buddhism. My name is Anthony Elmore, and we have given you a lecture on Buddhism in Africa. And these are my words. I found myself a brand new mission to help others make a big decision. I bring to you a smooth, smart religion. It's not the religion that you expect. It's all about the law of cause and effect. Devotion to the wisdom of the cause and effect teaching. We bring to you a wisdom preaching. Now you're in ghetto, it's the way to make your karma go. Now you're in ghetto, it's the way. I found myself a brand new mission to help others make a big decision. We bring to you a smooth religion. It's not the religion that you expect. It's all about the law of cause and effect. Devotion to the wisdom of the cause and effect teaching. We do a lot of wisdom preaching. No more life with any drama. We change the words and change our karma. We bring to you the new Buddha way.